I took a deep breath, the sterile, air-conditioned air feeling thin in my lungs. I looked Arthur directly in the eye, the man who had given me a second chance at life. "Arthur," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "The failure at that community meeting. It was my fault, entirely my fault." His expression didn't change. He remained impassive, a corporate sphinx. He was waiting, letting the silence press down on me, forcing me to fill it. "Diego was not prepared because I failed him as a mentor," I continued, choosing my words carefully. "There has been a situation, a personal situation." I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Impatience? Disappointment? He steepled his fingers, a gesture I had come to recognize as a sign of deep thought. "Get to the point, Mariana," he said, his voice quiet but sharp as glass. "I do not have time for vague corporate apologies. What is the situation?" This was it, the precipice. I could still pull back, make up a smaller lie, a more palatable excuse. But I was tired of lies. They were heavier than floodwater. "Diego and I, we spent the night together," I said. The words came out blunt, ugly. I saw his composure crack. A muscle in his jaw twitched, for the first time since I'd met him. Arthur looked genuinely shocked. He leaned back in his leather chair, the soft creak echoing in the silent room. He stared at me for a long, unbearable moment. I could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. He was reassessing everything he thought he knew about me. "Explain," he commanded. It was not a request, so I did. I told him everything, starting with the thunderstorm and Diego's panicked call. I spared no detail of my own culpability, my loneliness, my recklessness. I did not paint myself as a victim. I painted myself as what I was, a fool who had let a moment of weakness jeopardize a mission that was bigger than myself. As I spoke, I watched his face shift from shock to a profound, weary disappointment that was worse than anger. It felt like a judgment on my very character. "He has a girlfriend," I finished, my voice barely a whisper. "A girl back home he's planning to marry. I knew that, and I went ahead anyway." The room was silent again. The only sound was the faint hum of the city traffic, a world away from the wreckage of my own making. "Do you have any idea?" Arthur finally said, his voice low and laced with a cold fury. "What you have done? This isn't about your personal life." He stood up and walked to the vast window that overlooked the city, the reconstruction sites dotting the landscape like fresh scars. "This is about trust," he said, his back to me. "The trust of the community, the trust of our investors, the trust of the board, my trust in you." He turned around, his eyes blazing. "I brought you in here, Mariana. I vouched for you. I told everyone that your integrity was your greatest asset." He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "It seems I was mistaken. You brought the chaos of the streets right into my boardroom. The one thing I hired you to prevent. Every word was a perfectly aimed blow. He was dismantling me, piece by piece, with the cold precision of a surgeon, and I deserved every cut." "What do you think Peterson would do if he found out?" he asked, a rhetorical question. "He would use this to discredit you, to discredit me, to derail this entire project." He was right. Peterson would see this not as a personal failure, but as proof that I was, and always had been, unfit for this world. A liability. "So what now?" I asked, my voice hollow. "Am I fired?" The word tasted like ash in my mouth. To have come so far, only to be cast out. Arthur was silent for a long time. He paced the length of his office, his polished shoes sinking into the thick carpet. He was deciding my fate. Firing you would be the easiest thing to do, he said, finally stopping in front of me. It would be clean. Peterson would be delighted. My heart sank. This was it, the end of my short, improbable career. I would be sent back to the world of before, but as a pariah. But, he continued, and I looked up, it would also be a waste. Despite this catastrophic lapse in judgment, you are still the best person for this job. A tiny, fragile flicker of hope ignited in my chest. It was a cruel hope, because I knew it would come with a price, a very high price. So here is what is going to happen, he said, his voice now devoid of all emotion. It was the voice of a commander, not a mentor. Your relationship with Diego, whatever it was, is over. As of this second, you will not speak to him unless it is absolutely, professionally necessary. I nodded, unable to speak. You will go back to that community you humiliated yesterday. You will go back to every community leader you have spoken to, and you will regain their trust. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. You will do it without your corporate title. You will do it without my protection. You will do it as Mariana. This was my punishment. He was stripping me of my armor, of my borrowed power, and sending me back into the wilderness. It was terrifying. And it was just. And Diego? I asked, my voice trembling. What happens to him? I had created this mess. I couldn't bear the thought of him being the only casualty. Arthur's eyes were cold. Mr. Rodriguez's future with this company is under review. That is no longer your concern. Your only concern is fixing the damage you caused. He walked back to his desk and sat down, a clear dismissal. You have 1 month, Mariana. 1 month to prove that the woman I met in that tent is still in there. He picked up his phone, his attention already elsewhere. If you fail, you're not just fired. I will personally make sure you never work in this city again. The threat hung in the air, heavy and absolute. I stood up on shaky legs, my body feeling strangely light, as if I had shed a skin. Thank you, Arthur, I said. It was a strange thing to say, but I meant it. He could have destroyed me. Instead, he had given me a chance at redemption. He didn't look up. I walked out of his office, closing the door softly behind me. The walk back to my own office was the longest walk of my life. Could feel the eyes of the other employees on me. Did they know? Could they see the brand of my shame? The air itself felt thick with judgment. I saw Peterson down the hall. He caught my eye and gave me a slow, predatory smile. He didn't know the details, but his instincts told him my shield was down. I ignored him and kept walking, my head held high. I would not give him the satisfaction. I sat down at my desk, my hands shaking too much to type. My first task was to talk to Diego. I owed him that. I had to tell him what happened, what Arthur had decided. I sent him a short, professional text. Meet me in the small conference room on the 10th floor in 5 minutes. Urgent. It was cold, impersonal. It had to be. When he entered the room, he looked like a ghost. The past 24 hours had aged him a decade. The youthful spark in his eyes was gone. He wouldn't look at me. He just stared at the floor, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. What is it? He asked, his voice flat. I told him, I said simply. I told Arthur everything, Diego. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and, surprisingly, relief. The terror was for his career, his future. The life he had been so carefully building. The relief was for the end of the lies. The burden had been lifted. "What did he say?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "Am I fired?" He looked so young, so utterly lost. The caregiver in me wanted to comfort him. But I couldn't. That Mariana was gone. I had to be the professional, the bearer of bad news. The woman who had set this fire and now had to watch it burn. "He said your future is under review," I told him, repeating Arthur's cold words. "He told me that I am to have no further contact with you." The finality of my words hung between us. It was a formal severing. The end of our friendship, the end of our affair, the end of us. He just nodded, a jerky mechanical movement. He looked out the window at the same city I had looked at from Arthur's office, a city of second chances. "My girlfriend," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "She's coming to visit this weekend. I don't know what I was going to do." He finally looked at me, and for the first time, I saw anger in his eyes, a hot, resentful anger. "You shouldn't have done it, Mariana," he said. "Done what?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "Told him," he said, his voice rising. "This was our mess, mine. I was going to handle it. I was going to confess. Now you've just made it all worse." He was rewriting history, shifting the blame. It was a classic defense mechanism, and a part of me understood it. He needed a villain. I was the obvious choice. "You made it about you," he accused, his voice bitter. "You went to Arthur to save your own job, your own skin. You didn't care what happened to me." His words were unfair, but they contained a sliver of truth that stung. Had my confession been entirely selfless, or was it also an act of self-preservation? Didn't answer him. There was nothing to say. We were two people in a wreckage of our own making, pointing fingers at the pilot. "I have to go," he said abruptly, turning for the door. "I have to call Sarah. I have to try and fix what's left of my life." He paused at the door, his hand on the knob. He looked back at me one last time, his face a mixture of anger, regret, and a deep, inconsolable sadness. "I wish I'd never met you," he said, the words a quiet, devastating blow. Then he was gone, leaving me alone in the silent, sterile room. I sank into a chair, the weight of his final words pressing down on me. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps I was a storm, a hurricane in human form. I had washed away my own life, and in the process, I had swept him up and shattered his. The thought was unbearable, but Arthur's voice echoed in my mind. 1 month. I couldn't afford to drown in my own guilt. I had work to do. I had a promise to keep. I went back to my desk, pulled out a notebook, and started to make a list. A list of every community leader I needed to visit, every person I needed to face. This was my penance, not in a boardroom, not with a fancy title, but on the streets, in the half-built community centers, in the heart of the world I had left behind. My first visit was to Reverend Michael, a powerful and respected leader in the lower Ninth Ward. He had been a reluctant ally, always suspicious of the corporation. The disastrous meeting had destroyed the fragile trust I had built with him. Now, I had to face him without my corporate armor. I drove my company car to his small temporary church, a trailer set up in a muddy lot. It felt strange to be back here, in the land of the real. I found him outside, helping a group of volunteers unload bags of rice. He saw me get out of the car, and his face hardened. He did not look happy to see me. "Reverend," I said, my voice feeling small in the open air. Can I have a moment of your time?" He wiped his sweaty brow with the back of his hand and looked me up and down. He noticed the absence of my usual blazer, my professional demeanor. "You're a long way from your glass tower, Miss Mariana," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Lose your way?" The sarcasm was thick. "No, Reverend," I said, meeting his hard gaze. "I think I'm finally finding it." His words hung in the air, a clear dismissal. But I didn't move. I had not come all this way to be turned away by a sarcastic remark. I had to make him listen. "I deserve that," I said quietly. "I deserve your anger. The meeting was a disaster, and it was my fault. I let you down. I let your community down." My admission seemed to surprise him. He stopped, a half-full bag of rice in his hands, and turned to face me fully. He squinted as if trying to see me clearly. "An apology," he said, a cynical smile touching his lips. "That's a new one. Usually your company just sends another man, in a better suit to smooth things over." "I am not here for the company, Reverend," I said, taking a step closer. "They don't even know I'm here. In fact, they would probably be very angry if they did." That got his attention. He put the bag down and crossed his arms over his broad chest. "All right, Mariana. You have 5 minutes. Talk." I told him the truth. Not the whole truth, not the sordid details about Diego, but the emotional truth, the truth of my own failure. "I lost my way," I confessed, the words tasting like rust. "I got seduced by the glass tower, by the salary, the title, the feeling of importance. I looked around at the muddy lot, at the resilient faces of the volunteers. I forgot what it feels like to stand here. I forgot the smell of the dirt. Forgot that trust isn't something you can put on a spreadsheet," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "It's built right here with hands and sweat and honesty." I told him I was no longer a senior counselor with a direct line to the top. I told him my authority had been stripped away. I was just me. "I came here today to ask for nothing," I said. "Only to tell you that I was wrong, and to say that I am going to spend every day trying to make it right." He listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. He was a man who had heard a lifetime of promises from powerful people. He knew the anatomy of a lie. When I was finished, the silence stretched on. A volunteer called his name, but he waved them off, his eyes still locked on mine. "Words are cheap, child," he said finally, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "I've heard prettier speeches from snakes. Your boss puts you in timeout and now you come running back to us. It's more than a timeout," I insisted. "It's a chance, a last chance, maybe, to prove that the woman from the tent is still here somewhere." He considered this, stroking his chin. He looked over at the trailer that served as his church and then at a smaller shed next to it. "You want to prove something?" he challenged, a glint in his eye. "You see that shed? That's our after-school program, a place for the kids to do homework." He pointed a thick finger at it. "The generator that powers the lights and the one computer we have is dead. Been dead for 3 weeks. I've called your company a dozen times," he went on, his voice rising with a familiar frustration. "They transfer me from one department to another. They promise a work order. Nothing happens." He turned his full attention back to me. "You're just Mariana now, you say. No power, no title. Just a woman who wants to help." "Fine," he said, a humorless smile on his face. "Help. Get us a new generator. Not in a month, not in a week. I want it here by Friday." It was an impossible task, I knew it. He knew it. It was designed for me to fail. to give up, and to go back to my glass tower with my tail between my legs. "If a new generator is running in that shed by Friday," he said, "I will listen to whatever else you have to say. If not, don't ever set foot in my parish again." He turned his back on me then, a clear dismissal. "5 minutes are up." He went back to the volunteers, leaving me standing alone in the mud. I stood there for a moment, the weight of the impossible task settling on me. This was it. My first test, and it was a suicide mission. I got back in my car, my mind racing. How could I possibly get a commercial-grade generator in 3 days with no authority and no budget? My first instinct was to try the system I knew. I drove back to the city, not to my office, but to a small coffee shop nearby. I started making calls. I called the facilities department. I was polite, friendly. The moment I gave my name, the tone on the other end of the line became cold, bureaucratic. "You'll have to file a formal request through the community outreach portal, Ms. Mariana," a bored voice informed me. "Processing time is 4 to 6 weeks." I tried to explain the urgency, but it was like talking to a brick wall. I was no longer a VIP. I was just another number in the queue. Next, I called Peterson's office, swallowing my pride. I knew he was the one who could approve an expedited order with a single phone call. His assistant put me on hold for 15 minutes before coming back. "Mr. Peterson is in a meeting," she said coolly. "He will not be available for the rest of the week." Clown was a lie, and we both knew it. Peterson was actively blocking me. He wanted me to fail. He wanted to see me crash and burn. It was a corporate execution. I spent the rest of the day calling, emailing, pleading. Every door was slammed in my face. The system I had once been a part of was now a fortress I couldn't penetrate. As the sun set, I sat in my silent, empty apartment, surrounded by the trappings of a life I no longer truly lived. I felt a crushing sense of defeat. The Reverend was right. Peterson was right. I was a fraud, a woman who had been given a taste of power and had mistaken it for her own strength. I thought about calling Arthur, begging him to intervene. But I knew that was not an option. This was my test, my burden. I had to lift it myself. I went to bed that night feeling a familiar despair, the same kind of hopelessness I had felt on the roof, the feeling of being utterly, completely alone. The next morning I woke up with a new resolve. The corporate way had failed, so I would have to go back to the old way, the way of the survivor, the way of the tent. I put on my old jeans and a sturdy pair of boots. I left my corporate ID on the kitchen counter. Today I was not a counselor. I was a hustler. My first stop was back in the Tremé. I went to see Mr. Boudreau, an old mechanic who could fix anything and knew everyone. His garage had survived the storm. He was a friend of my father's. I found him under the hood of an ancient pickup truck, his hands stained with a lifetime of grease. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," he grunted not unkindly as I approached. "Thought you were too fancy for us folks down here now." I smiled. "Never, Mr. Boudreau. In fact, I've come to ask for your help." I explained the situation. The church, the kids, the generator. I didn't mention the corporation. I framed it as a community need. He listened, wiping his hands on a rag. "A commercial generator, huh? That's a tall order, girl. Those things ain't cheap." "I know," I said. "But I was thinking, you know people. You know who might have one sitting around or who could get one for a fair price." He chewed on an unlit cigar, thinking. "There's a salvage yard over in the West End. Guy named Sal runs it. He gets all sorts of equipment from the storm cleanup. He looked me over. Sal's a tough customer, but he owes me a favor. Tell him Boudreaux sent you. He might listen. He might also throw you out. It was a long shot, but it was more than I had before. I thanked him profusely and drove to the West End, a part of the city still deeply scarred by the storm. The salvage yard was a graveyard of the flood. Mountains of twisted metal, ruined appliances, water-damaged cars. It smelled of rust and decay. I found Sal in a small, cluttered office. He was a large, intimidating man with a face like a clenched fist. He looked at me with open suspicion. "What do you want?" He grunted, not bothering to offer me a seat. "Mr. Boudreaux sent me," I said, my voice steady. His expression softened, just a fraction. "Boudreaux, huh? What's that old coot want now?" I told him the story, the after-school program, the broken generator, the deadline. I laid it all out, my appeal direct and from the heart. He listened, picking at his teeth with a paperclip. "So you want me to just give you a multi-$1,000 piece of equipment for a sob story?" "I'm not asking you to give it to me," I clarified. "I want to know if you have one, and what it would take to get it." My directness seemed to earn me a sliver of respect. He led me out into the yard, through a maze of wreckage, and there it was, sitting in a corner covered by a dusty tarp, a generator. It was bigger than I expected, but it looked solid. "Came out of a restaurant that went under," he said. "The engine is good. Cleaned it up myself. Just needs a new fuel pump. Minor stuff." My heart leaped. It was perfect. "How much?" I asked, dreading the answer. I had some savings, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. He named a price. It was fair, probably even generous, but it was still far beyond my reach. My face must have fallen, because he chuckled. "Look, lady," he said, "I'm not a charity. I run a business. Boudreaux's favor gets you to the front of the line. It doesn't get you a free ride." I was so close. I could see the solution right in front of me, but it was locked behind a wall of money I didn't have. The frustration was immense, I thought, about my options. I could try to fundraise, but that would take weeks. The deadline was Friday. I had one day left. Then an idea sparked, an old-fashioned idea, a Treme idea. "What if I don't have the cash?" I asked, looking him right in the eye. "Is there anything else you need? Anything at all?" He raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Like what?" "I don't know," I said, my mind racing, pulling on all my old knowledge of the community. Labor, supplies, connections. I thought about the volunteers at the church, the skills in the community. The people were the real currency, not the money. "Your office," I said, gesturing to the cluttered shack. "It's a mess. Your books are probably a disaster. I can organize it. Create a real inventory system." He looked at me, then at his office, then back at me. I had hit a nerve. He was a great mechanic, but he was a terrible bookkeeper. "And the fuel pump," I pressed on, my confidence growing. "You said it was a minor fix. I know the best mechanic in the city, Mr. Boudreaux." I could talk to him, I offered. Maybe he'd be willing to do the repair work in exchange for, I don't know, something you have here that he needs. I was proposing a barter, a system of trade and favors, the way things used to get done before the contracts and the corporations took over. Sally was silent for a long time, looking at the generator. I could see the gears turning in his head. He was a businessman, and I was offering him a good deal. He was getting his office organized, his prize piece of equipment repaired, And all it would cost him was a machine that was just collecting dust. Anyway, finally he spat on the ground and stuck out a greasy hand. "You got a deal, lady," he said, a slow grin spreading across his face. "You drive a hard bargain." I shook his hand, a surge of triumph washing over me. It was a victory. A small one, but it was mine. I hadn't used a title or a budget. I had used my wits. The next 24 hours were a blur of coordinated chaos. I called Boudreaux, who grumbled but agreed to the repair in exchange for a rare transmission Sal had. I gathered a team of volunteers from the church, women who had been bookkeepers and secretaries in their former lives. We descended on Sal's office. We spent the entire day transforming the chaos into order. We created a filing system, inventoried every major piece of equipment, and set up a simple tracking system. While we worked, Boudreaux and his 2 sons got the generator purring. Like a kitten, they loaded it onto the back of their old pickup truck. As the sun was setting on Friday, we drove that generator to the church. The entire way, I felt a nervous, buzzing energy. I had met the deadline. When we pulled into the lot, Reverend Michael was waiting. He saw the generator in the back of the truck, and his jaw literally dropped. He walked over, his eyes wide with disbelief. He ran a hand over the clean metal casing, listening to the soft hum of the engine. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just looked at the generator, then at me, then back at the generator. The volunteers and Boudreaux's sons began the work of installing it, connecting it to the shed. "How?" the Reverend finally asked, his voice full of a genuine wonder that was more satisfying than any corporate praise. "How in God's name did you do this?" "I asked for help," I said, a simple truth that felt profound. "I remembered that we are stronger together than we are alone." He nodded slowly, a real smile finally reaching his eyes. "You did good, child," he said, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder. "You did real good." The lights flickered on in the after-school program. A cheer went up from the small crowd that had gathered. In the window, I could see the faces of the children, illuminated and full of hope. It was just one generator, one small light in a city still full of darkness. But it was a start. It was a promise kept. I knew my journey was far from over. I still had a long list of people to face, a mountain of trust to rebuild. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like myself again. As Boudreaux's truck rumbled away, the new lights in the shed cast a warm, steady glow against the deepening twilight. It was a beacon, a small but defiant victory. Reverend Michael led me to the steps of his trailer church, and we sat down on the top step, the metal cool beneath us. The air was filled with the sound of children's laughter from the shed. "I haven't heard that sound in a long time," he said, more to himself than to me. "Real happy laughter, not the nervous kind." We sat in a comfortable silence for a moment. The dynamic between us had shifted. I was no longer an intruder, but a guest. Still on probation, perhaps, but a guest nonetheless. "He's testing you, isn't?" "Hey," the Reverend asked, his voice losing its hard edge, becoming softer, more pastoral. "Your boss, Arthur. This is his crucible." I nodded, looking at my hands. They were smudged with dirt and a little grease from the generator. They felt more like my own hands than they had in months. "He told me I had to prove that the woman from the tent was still here," I admitted. "He took away my title, my access. He said I had to fix the damage myself," the Reverend grunted. "A wise man, for a man who builds glass towers. He knows your power was never in the title. It was in the dirt. He's forcing you to remember that." He looked at me, his gaze kind but penetrating. But this is about more than a bungled meeting. Isn't it, child? The wound is deeper than that. I didn't answer. I couldn't tell him about Diego. It was a shame that was mine alone to carry. But he didn't press for details. He was a man who understood the burdens of the heart. You got lost, he said, and the simple words resonated with a painful truth. It's easy to do in their world. The air is thin up there. It makes you forget how to breathe. He leaned back, looking up at the first stars pricking the night sky. Your strength, Mariana, comes from your roots, from knowing whose you are and who you fight for. When you were in that tent, it was simple, he continued. You fought for us, but in that boardroom, you started fighting for them too. For your seat at the table. No one can serve two masters. His words were a gentle indictment, but they were also a balm. He was giving a name to the conflict that had been tearing me apart. He was offering me a map out of the wilderness. What do I do, Reverend? I asked, the question feeling heavy with the weight of my future. You keep doing this, he said, gesturing toward the lighted shed. You keep your hands in the dirt. You listen more than you talk. And you remember that rebuilding a city is just like rebuilding a soul. You start with the foundation. I left the church that night with a renewed sense of clarity. The path forward was not about winning back a title or a salary. It was about winning back myself. When I got to the office the next morning, something was different. The atmosphere was buzzing. As I walked to my desk, I saw people looking at me, then quickly looking away, whispering. My heart sank. The news about Diego must have broken. I braced myself for the humiliation, the HR summons, the final disgraceful exit. But then my one ally, in the office, a kind-hearted administrative assistant named Gloria, scurried over to my desk, her face beaming. Mariana, you're a legend, she whispered excitedly. The whole office is talking about it. I was confused. Talking about what? The generator, she said. The story is everywhere. How you went rogue, how Peterson tried to block you, and how you got it done anyway. They're calling you the guerrilla counselor. It was surreal. My act of penance had somehow been transformed into an act of corporate rebellion. In a world of bureaucracy and red tape, my old-fashioned hustle was seen as a superpower. I saw Peterson down the hall. He was talking to another executive, his face tight with fury. He saw me, and his eyes narrowed into slits of pure hatred. Had not only succeeded, I had succeeded in a way that highlighted his own petty obstructionism. I had made him look like a fool, and a man like Peterson never forgives an insult like that. I knew then that this was far from over. He wouldn't just be an obstacle anymore. He would be a hunter. And I was his prey. Later that day, I received an email. It was from Arthur. It was only one sentence. I hear the children that have light for their homework. Good. It wasn't praise. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was an acknowledgement, a signal that my efforts were being watched. It was enough to keep me going. I looked at the list on my desk. Reverend Michael's name was crossed off. The next name was Evangeline Thibodeau. And she was going to be much, much harder. Evangeline was the unofficial queen of the Bayou St. John neighborhood, a tough, no-nonsense woman who ran the local business association and had the ear of every shop owner and resident. She had been at the disastrous meeting sitting in the front row. Her expression of pure, unadulterated disgust was burned into my memory. She did not suffer fools. I found her in her small, meticulously organized office behind the bakery she owned. The air smelled of yeast and cinnamon. It was a comforting smell for a terrifying meeting. She didn't offer me a seat. She just stood behind her desk, her arms crossed, her eyes like chips of flint. "I have nothing to say to you," she said, her voice clipped and final. "Ms. Thibodeau," I began, "I came here to personally apologize for what happened at that meeting. It was unacceptable. I take full responsibility." "Responsibility?" she scoffed. "That's a word your company loves to use when it means nothing. You people sent a boy to do a man's job, and he insulted our intelligence." "He was nervous," I offered weakly. "He was incompetent," she shot back. "And you, who were supposed to be our advocate, just stood there and let it happen. You're either a fool or a coward. I haven't decided which." Her words were brutal, but fair. From her perspective, that's exactly how it looked. My internal struggles meant nothing to the people who were being lied to. "I am neither," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I am a woman who made a mistake, and who is trying to fix it. I am not asking for your trust. I am asking for a chance to earn it." She stared at me, her expression unchanging. "What do you want, Mariana?" I took a deep breath. "I want to know what the biggest problem is that my company is causing in your neighborhood right now. Not the one on the official reports. The real one." This approach seemed to catch her off guard. She had expected more excuses, more corporate spin. She didn't expect a direct question. She was silent for a moment, then gave a short, bitter laugh. "The real problem. The real problem is the army of subcontractors your company hired." She leaned forward, her eyes flashing. "Specifically, a company called Triton Construction. They're in charge of the residential gutting. They hire local guys, day laborers. And then they don't pay them," she finished, her voice dripping with contempt. "Or they pay them half, claiming the work was substandard. These are men with families, Mariana. They're desperate." My blood ran cold. This was serious. This wasn't a broken generator. This was theft, wage theft, impacting the most vulnerable people. "I've filed 12 complaints," she said, waving a thick file folder at me. "Your company's response?" "We are investigating." That was 2 months. "Here you go." She threw the folder on her desk. "So you want to earn my trust? Fix that. Get my people the money they are owed. Every last cent of it." It was another impossible task. I was being asked to investigate a powerful subcontractor, a company likely chosen and protected by someone high up, someone like Peterson. "I'll look into it," I said, my mind already spinning with the dangers of what I was about to do. This was not a community project. This was an internal investigation. She gave me a skeptical look. "Don't look into it. Fix it. You have until the end of the month. Then I go to the press, and I will name you, your boss, and your entire company." I left her bakery with a knot of ice in my stomach. This was a new level of danger. Before, I was fighting for my job. Now I felt like I was stepping into a criminal conspiracy. I started by doing what I did best. I went to the people. I spent the next few days talking to the laborers who had been cheated by Triton Construction. I met them in coffee shops, on street corners, in the half-finished shells of their own homes. Their stories were heartbreakingly similar. They would work for a week, get a fraction of their promised pay, and be told to take it or leave it. They were men who had lost everything, now being victimized again. They showed me their pay stubs, their flimsy handwritten contracts. The evidence was overwhelming. But it was all circumstantial. It was their word against a powerful company. I knew I needed more. I needed inside information. I needed to see Triton's books, their payment records to the corporation. And there was only one place to get that. I had to go back into the lion's den. I had to go back to the office and somehow access the accounting files. An impossible task for someone who was now an outcast. I needed a key, an ally on the inside. My mind immediately went to Gloria, the kind assistant. She saw everything. She knew where all the bodies were buried. But could I risk involving her? If we were caught, she would be fired instantly. It was a terrible thing to ask. As I wrestled with the decision, I drove past Diego's old apartment building. On a whim, I pulled over. I don't know what I was looking for. Absolution, maybe. As I sat there, a moving van pulled up. A few minutes later, Diego walked out, carrying a box of his belongings. He was with his girlfriend, Sarah. She was pretty, just like in her picture. She was laughing at something he said. They looked happy. Or at least, they were trying to be. He saw me. Our eyes met across the street. For a moment, the world stopped. There was no anger in his gaze anymore. Just a profound, lingering sadness, a shared regret. He gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a gesture of peace, of closure. Then he got in the van, and they drove away, out of the city, out of my life. I watched the van until it disappeared. A chapter was closed, a painful, destructive chapter. I felt a strange sense of peace. He was going to be okay. Now it was my turn. His nod had given me the clarity I needed. I had to see this through, no matter the risk. I drove back to the office. I found Gloria packing up her desk for the day. I asked if I could buy her a coffee. She looked surprised, but agreed. In a quiet corner of the cafe, I laid it all out. The unpaid workers, Triton, Ms. Thibodeau's threat. I didn't mention my suspicions about Peterson. I told her I needed to see the payment files for Triton Construction. I just needed to verify the payment dates and amounts. It was a simple request, but a dangerous one. She listened, her brow furrowed with concern. "Mariana," she whispered. "You know who signed the Triton contract, don't you? It was Peterson's flagship project." I knew. That's what made it so dangerous. "Gloria," I said, looking her in the eye. "These people are being robbed. I can't let it go. It's not right." She wrung her hands, her loyalty to me at war with her, fear of Peterson. She was a single mom with 2 kids. She couldn't afford to lose her job. "I can't," she said, her voice full of regret. "I'm sorry, Mariana. It's too risky. Peterson would destroy me." My heart sank. It was a dead end. I had failed. Stood up to leave, my mind a blank slate of defeat. "I understand," I said, and I truly did. "Thank you for listening." As I turned to go, she grabbed my arm. "Wait," she said, her eyes darting around nervously. "I can't get you the files, but—" She hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Everyone leaves at 7. The cleaning crew comes in. They have master key cards. They're good people." She looked at me meaningfully. The night supervisor, Maria, her cousin, is one of the men working for Triton. One of the ones who hasn't been paid. She let go of my arm. "I'm not telling you to do anything," she said, her face pale. "I'm just telling you a fact." Then she gathered her purse and walked away, leaving me sitting there with a new, incredibly dangerous and brilliant idea. I was going to break into my own office. That evening, I didn't go home. I went to a small diner and drank bitter coffee for hours watching the clock on the wall. My fear was a cold, hard knot in my stomach. Gloria's words replayed in my mind. "The cleaning crew comes in at 7. The night supervisor, Maria, Her cousin is one of the men who hasn't been paid. It was a thread. A fragile, dangerous thread. But it was the only one I had. To pull on it was to risk everything. Not just my job, but my freedom. This was illegal. But then I pictured the faces of the men I'd spoken to. Honest, hard-working men who were being systematically robbed. I thought of Miss Evangeline's fiery gaze. I thought of the Reverend's words. You start with the foundation. The foundation of the whole reconstruction project was rotten, and I was the only one who knew it. At 6:30, I left the diner. I drove to the corporate tower, parking a block away. I watched the last of the office workers leave, their silhouettes hurrying home. The building, a beacon of power and commerce during the day, transformed as the lights went out floor by floor. It became a dark, sleeping giant. I walked to the rear, of the building, to the service entrance. The alley was dark and smelled of stale grease and damp cardboard. I felt like a criminal, hiding in the shadows. A few minutes after 7, a white van pulled up. The cleaning crew, a group of men and women, mostly immigrants, their faces tired from a long day, ready for a long night. I watched them file in, my heart pounding. I was looking for a woman who fit the description Gloria had given me. Middle-aged, with a kind face and sharp eyes. I saw her. She was the last one in, directing the others. Her movements efficient and authoritative. That had to be Maria. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the shadows. "Maria?" I called out, my voice barely a whisper. She turned, her body instantly tense, her hand moving to the phone on her hip. She was a woman who was used to trouble. "Who's asking?" she said, her voice wary, her English accented but clear. "My name is Mariana," I said, stepping into the dim light. "I work here. Or, I used to. It's complicated." I knew I had to get to the point quickly. "Gloria from the 22nd floor. She said I should talk to you," I continued. Her suspicion lessened slightly at the mention of Gloria's name. "What about?" "It's about your cousin," I said, my voice low and urgent. "The one who works for Triton Construction, and about why he isn't getting his full pay." Her eyes widened. The professional mask fell away, replaced by a look of worry and anger. I had struck the right nerve. I had her attention. I told her everything. Who I was, what Ms. Evangeline had told me, what the workers were facing. I told her I was trying to prove it, but the company was blocking me. "I need to see the payment records, Maria," I said, laying my cards on the table. "I believe there's proof of the fraud in the accounting department's files." I could see the conflict in her face. She was a working woman, loyal to her job, but she was also part of the community being victimized. "If I help you, I could lose my job," she said, her voice a mix of fear and resignation. "I have a family." "I know," I said, my heart aching for the impossible position I was putting her in. "And if we do nothing, your cousin's family, and dozens of others, will lose everything." I held her gaze. "I can't do this without you. But I promise you, if this works, I will make sure those men get their money, and I will make sure the people responsible pay." She was silent for a long, agonizing moment. She looked at the dark building, then back at me. I could see the lifetime of small injustices she had endured flicker in her eyes. Finally, she gave a short, sharp nod. "Wait here," she said. "When the security guard goes on his first break at 9, I will let you in. You will have 20 minutes, not a second more." She disappeared inside, leaving me alone in the alley with my pounding heart. The next 2 hours were the longest of my life. At 9 o'clock precisely, the service door clicked open. Maria poked her head out. "Now," she whispered. "Hurry!" I slipped inside. The interior of the building was a different world, at night. The bustling hallways were eerily silent, the air still and cool. It felt like a tomb. Maria led me through a labyrinth of service corridors, our footsteps echoing softly on the concrete floors. She swiped her master keycard at a security door. "This leads to the main office floors," she said. "The accounting department is on the 24th floor. Peterson's office is on the 25th. We took the service elevator up. The ride was silent, tense. "The guard on this shift, his name is Frank," she said. "He's lazy. He does his rounds, then watches movies in the security office." "But you must be quiet," she warned. "The silence in this building at night, it carries every sound." When the elevator doors opened on the 24th floor, I felt a chill. The vast open-plan office was a sea of dark computer screens and empty chairs. A ghost ship. We moved quickly, using the light from Maria's phone to navigate the maze of cubicle. We found the accounting section, a walled-off area with glass doors. Maria swiped her card. The lock clicked open. We were in. "Where would they keep the subcontractor files?" she whispered. "On the server," I said, pointing to a humming bank of machines in a locked closet. "But the payment approvals, they might be on the department head's computer." We went to the office of the head of accounting. His computer was password protected. We were stuck. "Try Moneyman," Maria suggested. "Or Ghost Saints 23. The passwords people use are always stupid." We tried a few. Nothing. We were wasting precious time. I felt a surge of panic. We had come so far, only to be stopped by a password screen. "Wait," I said, an idea hitting me. "Peterson. He signed the contract. He would have access. And he's arrogant. His password will be about himself." We left accounting and hurried up the fire stairs to the 25th floor, the executive suites. The air up here was different. The carpet was thicker, the art on the walls more expensive. Peterson's office was at the corner with a panoramic view of the city. His door was locked, Maria's card swiped. A green light. We were in. His office was immaculate, soulless, a testament to a man who valued power over personality. I went straight to his computer. "Try Legend," I whispered to Maria. It was the name of his yacht, a fact I had overheard him boasting about at a corporate event. Maria typed it in. The screen flickered, then opened to his desktop. We were in. A surge of adrenaline shot through. Me. I frantically searched his files, my hands flying across the keyboard. I found a folder labeled Triton. My heart hammered against my ribs. I opened it, and there it was. Everything. There were 2 sets of invoices. One, the official set, showing the full fair wages paid to the day laborers. The one Triton submitted, to our company. And then there was another set, the real one, labeled Internal Accounting. It detailed the actual criminally low payments made. The discrepancy was millions of dollars. But then I found the smoking gun, an encrypted email chain between Peterson and the owner of Triton Construction. I clicked it open. The language was coded, but the meaning was clear. "Keep labor costs minimal," one email from Peterson read. "Creative accounting is encouraged. My bonus depends on this project's profitability." Another email from a month later was even more damning. "The community complaints are getting noisy. Make sure your people understand the terms of their employment. We can't have any loose ends. This wasn't just wage theft. This was a conspiracy, orchestrated from the very top of the project. Peterson wasn't just an accomplice. He was the architect." "I've got it," I whispered, my voice trembling with a mixture of horror and vindication. I pulled a USB drive from my pocket and began downloading the files. The progress bar on the screen moved with agonizing slowness. Every second felt like a minute. Suddenly we heard it. The faint jingle of keys. The soft squeak of a shoe on the polished floor outside. Frank, the security guard. He was early. Maria's eyes went wide with terror. She grabbed my arm, pulling me down under the massive mahogany desk. We huddled together in the darkness, not daring to breathe. The office door opened. A beam of light from a flashlight cut through the darkness, sweeping across the room. It danced over the chairs, the walls, the computer screen. Had I closed the files? I couldn't remember. If he saw the screen, we were finished. The beam stopped, pointed directly at the desk we were hiding under. I could see the dust motes dancing in the light. My heart stopped. This was it. He stood there for what felt like an eternity. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the shout, for the hand on my shoulder, for the click of handcuffs. Then, his radio crackled to life. "Frank," a voice squawked. "You got a situation down at the loading dock. A delivery truck hit the gate." "Copy that," Frank grumbled. The beam of light moved away. We heard the door close. He was gone. We stayed under the desk for a full minute, our bodies trembling with residual fear. The download was complete. We crept out of the office, out of the building, Maria leading the way. We didn't speak until we were back in the relative safety of the dark alley. "You are a crazy woman, Mariana," Maria said, a shaky laugh escaping her lips. "Truly crazy." "Thank you, Maria," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I held up the USB drive. "You have no idea what you've done tonight. You saved them." She just shook her head. "Be careful," she warned, her face serious again. "A man who steals millions from poor people, he will not hesitate to crush one woman who gets in his way." I went home, my hands shaking so badly I could barely fit the key in the lock. I plugged the USB drive into my laptop. It was all there. A corporate hydrogen bomb. The evidence was damning, irrefutable, but it was also poison. I had obtained it illegally. In any official hearing, it would be thrown out. I could be prosecuted. I had the weapon. But how could I use it without blowing myself up in the process? I could go to Arthur. But would he protect me? Or would he protect the company? Burying the scandal and me along with it? I could leak it to the press. Miss Evangeline's threat now seemed like a viable, if terrifying, option. The story would be explosive, but the fallout could hurt the entire reconstruction. I felt trapped. I had the truth, but the truth was a wild animal, and I didn't know how to control it. The next morning, I knew there was only one person I could talk to. One person who could help me see the path through the moral wilderness. I drove back to the lower Ninth Ward, the small USB drive feeling like a lead weight in my pocket. I found the Reverend supervising the installation of a new playground. I showed him the files on my laptop. He read through them, his expression growing darker and grimmer with every line. When he was done, he closed the laptop slowly. "This is a deep sickness," he said, his voice a low rumble of righteous anger. "This is evil, child, pure and simple." "What do I do, Reverend?" I asked, my voice pleading. "If I bring this to Arthur, I could go to jail. If I go to the press, I could destroy the project. If I do nothing, these men get away with it." He looked at me, his eyes full of a profound, ancient wisdom. "When the law serves injustice, and the powerful protect the corrupt, a righteous person has to make a choice." He gestured to the children playing. "Are you fighting to win a battle, Mariana, or are you fighting to win the war?" "The war," I whispered. Then you must choose the weapon that will win the war, he said. Even if it is the one that terrifies you the most. I left him, the weight of his words settling over me. He hadn't given me an answer. He had given me a question, and I knew, with a terrifying certainty, what my answer had to be. The Reverend's words settled not in my mind, but in my soul. Choose the weapon that will win the war. The war wasn't against Peterson. It wasn't even against the corporation. The war was against invisibility. It was a war to make the powerful see the people they had rendered invisible. My fear didn't vanish, but now it had a purpose. It was the cold, sharp fear of a soldier before a battle she chose to fight. I knew what I had to do. I was not going to be a soldier following orders. I was going to be a general. My first move was to return to the lioness's den. I went back to Evangeline Thibodeau's bakery. The scent of cinnamon and sugar a strange comfort in my new, dangerous reality. I didn't say a word. I simply opened my laptop on her desk and played a video file. It was a screen recording of me navigating Peterson's computer, opening the folders, revealing the 2 sets of books, zooming in on the incriminating emails. She watched the entire thing without blinking, her face a mask of stone. When it was over, she closed the laptop softly. "So," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "The snake has a name. He has a name, and I have his venom right here," I replied, tapping the USB drive I'd placed on her desk. "But it's not enough. To have the venom, you have to know how and when to strike." "What's your plan?" she asked, her eyes sharp, analytical. She was no longer a skeptic. She was a co-conspirator. "Your threat to go to the press was a good one," I said. "But a newspaper article can be spun, denied, buried. We need something they can't ignore. A public execution." I told her my idea. The annual Reconstruction Progress Gala, the pinnacle of corporate self-congratulation. The one night all the investors, politicians, and media would be in one room. "They will be celebrating their success," I said, my voice laced with ice. "While the men who built that success can't afford to feed their families. The hypocrisy is staggering. We're going to use it as a weapon." I laid out the plan. I needed her to organize the workers, not for a loud, angry protest, but for a silent, powerful one. A silent vigil outside the Grand Hotel where the gala would be held. "No shouting," I instructed. "Just silence. I want them to bring their families, their children. I want them to hold signs, simple white signs with a number on them. The amount of money they are owed." Evangeline's eyes lit up. She understood the power of the visual, the undeniable shame of it. "A silent army of the invisible," she whispered, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. "I like it." While she organized the ground troops, I prepared for my own infiltration. My corporate access was restricted, but my security badge still worked. I found the event planning documents on the shared server. I saw the staffing list. I found a low-level event coordinator who had recently quit. A few keystrokes, a quick edit, and Mariana was now on the list for backstage logistics. I was a ghost in the machine. The night of the gala, the air was electric. I arrived early, dressed in the simple black uniform of the event staff. I was invisible again. But this time, it was by choice. It was my camouflage. I moved through the glittering crowds, a servant in the palace of the people who had tried to break me. I saw Arthur looking regal and confident. I saw the mayor, the investors, the reporters. And I saw Peterson. He was in his element, basking in the praise, his laughter loud and obnoxious. He was the king of this corrupt castle, completely unaware that the walls were about to come tumbling down. Outside, I knew Evangeline's army was assembling. I got a text from her. A single photo of a sea of people, holding their white signs, their faces grim and determined in the glow of the streetlights. The press was already swarming them. The first phase of the plan was a success. The bomb was at the gates. Now, I had to light the fuse. Peterson was the keynote speaker. His speech was scheduled for 9 o'clock. At 8:50, I made my move. I knew he would be in the small VIP lounge backstage, having one last drink, puffing up his chest. I took a deep breath, the USB drive feeling like a cold stone in my hand. I walked to the door, my heart a steady, determined drum. I knocked once. "What is it?" He barked from inside. I opened the door and stepped in. He was pouring a whiskey, his back to me. "We have a problem with the presentation," I said, my voice calm and even. He turned, a scowl on his face, ready to tear into some hapless staffer. When he saw it was me, his face contorted into a mask of pure rage. "You!" he spat. "What in the hell are you doing back here? I will have you thrown out. I will have you arrested for trespassing." "I don't think you will," I said, closing the door behind me and locking it. I held up the USB drive. "Because you and I need to have a conversation about this." His eyes flickered, to the small piece of plastic, then back to my face. A flicker of confusion, then dawning, sickening realization. He knew. "I don't know what you're talking about," he blustered, but the color was draining from his face. "Oh, I think you do," I said, walking slowly towards him. I took out a small tablet from my folder. "I'm talking about Triton Construction, about 2 sets of books, about wage theft." I turned the tablet on and showed him the screen, his own emails, his own words. "I'm talking about your bonus," I said, my voice a blade. He stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. The bravado, the arrogance, it all just evaporated. In its place was the raw, primal fear of a cornered animal. "You broke into my office," he whispered, his voice hoarse with disbelief and terror. "That's a felony. I'll destroy you. I'll have you put in prison." "You could try," I said, my voice never wavering. "But my evidence isn't just on this drive. It's in a very safe place, with instructions to be sent to every major news outlet in the country if I'm not home safe by midnight." It was a bluff, but a good one. He had no way of knowing. And then, there's the matter of the 100 or so unpaid workers and their families currently holding a silent protest outside this hotel. I added pleasantly. "The cameras love a crying child, don't you think?" He collapsed into a chair, his whiskey forgotten. He was broken. I had him. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice the pathetic whine of a defeated man. "I want you to go out on that stage," I said, "and you are going to give a new speech." I slid a single piece of paper across the table to him. "You will announce that a grave accounting error has been discovered regarding the Triton contract," I instructed. "You will announce that your company is launching a full investigation and that all unpaid wages, with a 20% penalty, will be paid by the end of the week." He stared at the paper, then at me, his eyes full of hatred. "And then," I said, savoring the moment, "you will announce that, due to this oversight on your watch, you are tendering your resignation, effective immediately, for personal reasons." He looked like I had physically struck him. "My resignation? You can't be serious. My whole life is this company." "You should have thought of that before you decided to steal from the poor," I said. my voice devoid of any sympathy. "This is your choice, Peterson," I told him. "Either you read that speech and you get to quietly disappear, or I walk out that door, and your life as you know it is over. The reporters are waiting." I gave him one last look. "You have 2 minutes to decide." I walked to the door and unlocked it. I stood there, my back to him, counting the seconds in my head. It was the longest 2 minutes of my life. Finally, I heard the rustle of the paper. "Fine," he choked out, his voice thick with a rage that was terrifying in its impotence. "You win!" I walked out without looking back. I took my position in the wings of the stage. A stage manager gave Peterson his cue. He walked out on stage, a ghost in a $1,000 suit. He looked out at the bright lights, the expectant faces, his face pale and slick with sweat. He gripped the podium, his knuckles white. He looked over and saw me in the shadows. I gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. He began to read from the paper. His voice was flat, robotic. He announced the accounting error. A murmur went through the crowd. He announced the immediate payment of the workers. The murmur grew louder. Arthur, sitting in the front row, looked utterly bewildered. His eyes darted around the room, trying to understand what was happening. And then, Peterson delivered the final line. "And due to this serious lapse in oversight, I am hereby tendering my resignation." The room exploded. The bombshell had landed. Reporters were already on their feet, shouting questions. In the chaos, Arthur's eyes found mine across the crowded room. His face was a storm of confusion, shock, and a dawning, stunning understanding. He knew this was my doing. Peterson stumbled off stage, pushing past me, his eyes vacant. He was a ruined man. I felt no pity, only a cold, clean sense of justice. The next day, Arthur summoned me to his office. The glass tower felt different now. I wasn't entering as a supplicant or a pariah. I was entering as a victor. He was standing at the window, just as he had been on the day he gave me my ultimatum. He didn't turn around when I entered. "You know," he said, his voice quiet, contemplative. "I have spent my entire life playing chess. I anticipate every move. I control the board." He turned to face me. There was no anger in his eyes, only a deep, profound sense of awe. "Yesterday, you weren't playing chess. You just walked over and kicked the whole damn table over." Peterson was a cancer in this company, he admitted. "A sickness I couldn't cut out without poisoning the whole patient. You performed a radical surgery." "I did what I had to do," I said simply, "to win the war." He nodded slowly. "I gave you a month to prove you were still the woman from the tent. You proved it in a week." He walked over to his desk. "I can't have you as a counselor anymore, Mariana. Your methods are unorthodox." My heart skipped a beat. "But I can't afford to lose you," he continued. "I am creating a new department, the Office of Community and Corporate Ethics, an independent oversight body with real power, real teeth." He looked at me. "And I want you to run it, not as a counselor, but as a vice president, with the authority to investigate anyone, including me." It was the ultimate offer, a seat at the very top of the table, a chance to embed the conscience of the tent into the very DNA of the corporation. The old Mariana would have been intimidated. The old Mariana would have felt like an imposter. But I was not the old Mariana. "I accept," I said, "on 3 conditions." Arthur raised an eyebrow, a slow smile spreading across his face. He was enjoying this. "First," I said, "the new department will be based in the community, not in this tower. Second, my hiring budget will prioritize local people, not corporate recruits. And third, I finished, my voice clear and strong, you and every executive will spend 1 day a month working alongside me, in the dirt, so you never forget who we are really working for. He laughed, a genuine booming laugh. Done, he said, extending his hand. Welcome to the board, Madam Vice President. We shook hands. It wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new chapter. Months later, I stood on a different kind of stage. It was the dedication of a new community center in the lower 9th Ward, the one I had fought for, the one funded by the penalties from the Triton contract. I wasn't wearing a suit. I was wearing jeans. Reverend Michael and Ms. Evangeline were beside me. My new board of directors, in the crowd, I saw the faces of the children from the after-school program, the workers who had been paid, the families who had their homes back. Wasn't a ghost between two worlds anymore. I had built a bridge, and I was standing firmly in the middle of it. I had found a way to serve both masters, by forcing them to serve each other. I looked out at the resilient, beautiful, stubborn city that I loved. A city that, like me, had been broken and remade, stronger in the places where the water had tried to tear it apart. I had found my way back, not to the tent, not to the boardroom, but to myself. What do you think? Did I make the right choice in the end? And what would you have done with that USB drive? Let me know in the comments below. If this story touched you, share it now, so that more people can feel the same impact.